Welcome to our workshop. I'm going to walk you through the restoration of this Windsor chair. This chair is a reproduction piece, probably about 40 years old, and it's unique in that it's got a continuous back on it. Here I've got some through tenons and they're wedged, so it's a little more challenging to fix than the average chair. Stay tuned and I'll show you how to do it.
As a furniture repair business, we're opening the doors to our workshop to show you the tools and techniques to repair furniture.
What I need to do is take that apart, repair it, and put it back together so I can get this chair in working order.
We give you tips to make your repair projects easier. Let's get into the workshop and start fixing furniture.
Windsor chairs are considered America's first chair design. They started off in England, and the chair had a pierced back splat in the middle here, a decorative piece of wood. In the American style, that's been taken out, and these chairs have developed over time. They eventually developed technology to bend wood, and that became the hoop-backed Windsor chair. And this one's a further development, and that's a continuous arm chair that's made out of bent wood, so it's bent on several different axes. The chairs typically have a pine seat that's carved and shaped, and through tenons are not uncommon. This one has 6 of them here up on the arms, and then there's some in the lower section as well. This is a challenging chair to put together because of all the joints here that need to be glued. Typically I use a Lee Valley glue that has an open time of 20 minutes, and that's longer than the average glue. That means I can move the parts around for 20 minutes. But because of all of these pieces here, I'm going to be using fish glue from Lee Valley. It's a hide glue, and this gives me an open time of over an hour. So that way I can get the glue on all these pieces, position them the way I want, and then clamp them. The disadvantage of using a glue like this is I need 12 hours of clamping time. So it's taking up space in the shop, but it's the right tool for the job. The first thing I do is I use my labels here to label the parts left and right. That way I don't mix them up, especially with these curves that are on here. And then take it apart. On these through tenons here, they're wedged, and the wedge is there to keep them in place. So you can see there's a gap there, and the wedge comes in here and compresses that joint. This one has become loose, so I can see exactly what's going on here, but the rest of them I have to cut out and then make new wedges. With that cut all the way through, I now have some relief here that I'm not going to risk splitting this tenon with a chisel. So if you haven't seen a sharp chisel before, this is what one looks like. You see here at the tip, it's mirror finish. So when you got a chisel that sharp, doing work like this becomes very easy. So what I'm doing is just splitting the last part of that tenon off the joint. So there you go. I'm creating the wedges out of these small birch blocks. I mark them to width, and then I use a dovetail saw just to rip them, and then I use a chisel to make the wedge shape. The key on all this is having somewhere that you can secure small parts. So I've got a backsplash that I use on my bench, and then I can just put a board up against that, and then I've got something that I can work against. So here I'm just marking it to width, and then draw that line straight down there. Then I just use this as my clamping pressure forward and line that up the way I want, make my cut. Now to get these into a wedge shape, I'm going to use a sharp chisel. And I mentioned earlier, a sharp chisel is one that has a mirror finish on the edge. Let me see if I can get that shining just right. And the way you keep that edge is by honing. So here I've got honing compound on leather, holding it at the right angle, and then pulling it back. So I do that 30 times, and then come over to the clean leather side and do the same thing. I've only done it 20 times, but you get the idea. And then just running the back straight, just to clear off any burr. And there you've got a really sharp chisel. So you see that mirror finish? That's what you're looking for. So I do this about every 3 or 4 minutes when working with my chisels, and rarely have to sharpen them because they're always honed. To shape the wedge, I just put it here against the stop block, take some firm pushes, and slowly work back to make a wedge shape. So there's the start of the wedge. Just need to fine tune it a bit to get it a little bit thinner. That should be good. No, it's still a little too thick. And that I made a little too thin, so I just need to cut that bottom piece off, because what I want to do is stretch these pieces wide, and that's what puts pressure on the mortise. And the last step is to clean off the joints, because any finish or glue here will prevent it from sticking again. So I'm using sandpaper here on the tenon and inside the mortise to make sure they're clean. As I mentioned earlier, gluing with this fish glue gives me a long glue up time. So this process isn't a stressful assembly. What I do is take some glue and put it into a small container and use an artist brush. That way I can make sure I've got coverage on that full tenon. Once I've got the tenon covered off, what I do is use the back end of my artist brush and dip it in the glue and then put it in the mortise. What this does is allows me to get to the bottom of the hole so I can spread that glue around all sides and make sure I've got good glue coverage. That way I make sure I've got the strongest joint possible, so this chair is going to last for years to come. With the back on, I can now work on those through tenons in the arm. What I do is put glue on one side of the surface, and then position the spindle in the right spot, and then drive that wedge home. This is setting up the arm so it's in the right position. It's not yet clamped down to the chair. Once I've got all 6 of these put together, then what I do is clamp them down. There are 2 through tenons in the bottom that are wedged as well. By clamping down the arms, what I'm doing is tightening up all those joints. Then I use the wedge in the tenon underneath to tap it in and lock everything into place. So I wash off these remaining glue drips with hot water and let this sit for 12 hours and it'll be all ready to go. So this is dried overnight, so I can now take the clamps off. And the last part I've got to do here is cut off these wedges and just touch up the finish. You can see here on the edge that the finish is worn, so I'll need to touch that up. But when I cut these wedges out, I also have a bare piece of wood that I need to seal up. So I just use a flush cut saw to trim this off. After honing my chisel again, I'm ready now to slice through the wedges in these tenons. I do this to trim it up, get it flush, and have a nice smooth finish. And I finished it off by a little sanding with 220. You can see on this leading edge here that there's some finish worn off. This is a polyurethane, so it needs to be sanded down with a 400 grit paper and then wiped down with mineral spirits so it's prepared for the next coat of polyurethane. Now I finished this with a semi-gloss polyurethane, and the shine here is a little bit higher than the rest of the chair. So I need to knock that back, and what I do is I use 4/0 steel wool, superfine steel wool, just to rub it down and take away a bit of that shine. The top part of this Windsor chair is now ready, but the bottom part off camera I had to take apart and put back together to make sure this was a stable chair. If you want to see how to do that, you can watch our video on wobbly chairs. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please ask questions and leave your comments because we're building a supportive community about furniture repairs. Thanks for watching Fixing Furniture.